Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election in the state of Pennsylvania, and specifically a poll that came out yesterday from Emerson. It showed Trump leading Joe Biden by 2%, 45% for him, 43% for Joe Biden, and I will be looking at this poll, doing a bit of analysis, and talking about the state of Pennsylvania as a whole, because I think we can all agree Pennsylvania, at least as of right now, seems on track to be the most important state for 2024. It was the most important state in 2020. It was the tipping point. And in 2024, it could very well be the tipping point as well. So it can't, Pennsylvania can never be, overstated in its value to the American Electoral College. So we will be getting into it shortly. Again, if you're not already, subscribe to the channel, like a video. I'll be posting more and more as we get closer to the election. Give me your thoughts right now before I start on who you think should win Pennsylvania, because we'll be talking about Pennsylvania today. And give me thoughts on what you want to see next. If you have any states that you are interested in, please do that. Now, that being said, we're going to talk about this poll. So Emerson College comes out on Tuesday, and they said that Donald Trump maintains lead over Joe Biden. Now, there are some encouraging signs for Joe Biden here, which I will get right out of the way. For starters, you'll see he is closing the gap a little bit. He was down 3% in November, then it widened to 7% in January, and then it's back to, 2% within the margin of error. So that on the surface is good for Joe Biden. I want to caution against, this notion to the extent that I think a lot of people are buying into it, because a lot of people say, wow, he's doing 5% better this month than he was last month. And in that poll, that's true. But a lot of the movement we see in polls is what we call noise. It's not necessarily reflective of the actual electorate. And I personally don't think that, Biden or that Trump was at 48% and now he's down, to 45%. I don't think that many people have changed their minds in just a month when we're not even, 9 months away from the election. So, it's always good to close the gap in a poll, but a lot of this is just noise and bad samples and, maybe, just by chance polls messing up on things, and these are only a few percent, so it's excusable, especially when we're, like I just said, very far away from the next election. It's only February, but at the same time, you still have to remember that a lot of this is noise. So Biden, it's closing the gap, but he's still down, and you really have to wonder whether it's actually a 5% improvement from January. Now, more importantly, I think we can kind of validate this poll, at least based on what we know. Now, am I saying that I wholeheartedly believe everything this poll says? No. Especially in February, never going to do that. But what I will say is that the sample you have here, 41% Republican, 40% Democrat, just via party registration, that is genuinely pretty good. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, hold on, that's a bit, too Republican. In 2020, the sample was D+1, so you always want to aim for a D+1 sample in your polls. That's true. A D+1 sample will be fine, but you have to remember that turnout isn't consistent across every election, especially relative. And, look, if the 2020 electorate was D+1 in Pennsylvania, that's a fine sample, but if it gets to R+1, all that means is that there was a 2% delta between the two elections, which is, first of all, not in most cases significantly, statistically significant, even in a close state like Pennsylvania. And secondly, all that needs to happen for the sample to swing, say, 2% more towards Republicans would be for Democratic turnout to decrease by just a little bit more than Republican turnout, which is very possible, especially if you believe that Joe Biden, maybe doesn't have momentum with young voters or with progressive voters or whatnot. So you have to remember that, and you have to consider that dynamic, I guess I'll say. Now, this sample, like I just said, passes the smell test. I also think that it's good that they have the Senate race on here, because that can kind of check your work, I guess. It's like once you do an equation, if you plug the numbers back in, you get the right answer. That's kind of a good way to validate it. In this sample, Casey's up by 10, 49% for him. McCormick's at 39%. Obviously, David McCormick, as the Republican candidate, will likely not win the Senate race, but will definitely get more than 39% of the vote. He'll probably be in the mid to high 40s when it's all said and done in November. But this is a good sample, I would say. Casey's likely up by 10 right now. He's not going to win by 10, but he'll probably win. But right now, again, early Senate polls tend to benefit the incumbent just because of name recognition. And right now, I believe that if you held an election tomorrow he'd probably win by close to 10, just because of name recognition, just because David McCormick hasn't really begun campaigning against him yet. So that makes sense. And then finally, other Democrats polled. Biden's down by 2. Harris is down by 9, which is really not good for her at all. It's not what you'd expect there. And then Gavin Newsom is down by 15, but he's only 33%. A lot of that is name recognition, I think, and I think that if you put him up against Donald Trump, he would probably do close to Biden. Like, he wouldn't get a third of the vote in Pennsylvania. So those are just the broad things you're going to see at the top. And then if you go to some of the questions they asked, there's so many of these. I'm not even going to go through all of them. There's, how many rows do we have here? We have, looks like, 193. We're not going to go through all of them, but I'll look at a few. The first that I noticed, I think is maybe a little better for Joe Biden than I was expecting, is that not even a majority of voters think Pennsylvania is on the wrong track, and that's good for him because obviously some of that's the president, some of that is the governor, Josh Shapiro, who's also a Democrat. But the fact that only 49% of people told the poll that they think their state's on the wrong track, I think is pretty decent for Biden. In most polls, whether that be state or country, it's like 60 or 70% think the country is on the wrong track. In this poll, it's 49%, which is still the plurality, but not as big as you might expect. And then another thing that I thought was interesting is that Biden's approval is terrible. Like, this is a horrific number for him. He's 37% approval, 56% disapproval, but he's only down by 2% in this poll. So we have an electorate that is, furious at Biden. They hate him. They think that, they 56% of them say they disapprove of him. Only 37% say they approve. You have 7.5% are neutral, but they probably don't like Biden that much either if they're neutral. And he's only down by 2. That is not a bad sign at all for Joe Biden. And it really comes down to what you believe. Do you think it's more likely that Biden wins Pennsylvania or that he has a 37% approval rating? Both things are possible. Biden's really unpopular. I'm not saying this to be like, oh, well, Biden secretly is popular. Secretly, he actually has a 48% approval rating. No, he's obviously unpopular. Every poll corroborates that notion. However, on the flip side, if he's at 37% and still within the margin of error against Donald Trump, that is a much better sign for him than I would have predicted. And that shows that Trump himself is also a very weak candidate, because if his opponent's at 37% approval and he's barely beating him and he's only at 45% of the total vote, that's not good either. So those are the two things that I think are encouraging for Biden, more so than the fact that he's closed the gap since January, because, again, I don't really buy into that noise. Biden, I don't think was ever down by 7 in Pennsylvania. I don't think that, he's done 5%. He's doing 5% better now. I think it's all just samples and different people. Now, the last thing I want to take a look at here is the most important issue facing Pennsylvania. So first of all, you will see that the most important issue far and away is the economy. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that really this race, if you're assuming that this is going to stay constant for November, is about the economy. And that's not good for Joe Biden, because even though the economy might be better now than it was in the midterms, in Pennsylvania in the midterms, the number one issue wasn't the economy. It was abortion. Go back to CNN's exit polls. Abortion was the number one issue for voters in Pennsylvania, very narrowly. And so abortion is now down to 5% in total salience, less than other issues like crime, housing affordability, education, and healthcare. And that is that's a pretty interesting dynamic, because, again, abortion access carried Democrats in 2022. It wasn't the only reason they did well, but it was a huge part of it. It was the reason I think they ended up regaining momentum in the spring and summer, or in the summer, really, not really in the spring, in 2022. So you have to remember that. And then the other thing I noticed was that threats to democracy got about 10% of the total vote. That's interesting. It's, kind of about where you'd put it. But if that issue rises in salience, if more and more voters think threats to democracy are an issue, that could be a very sneaky X factor for Joe Biden, because there's a lot of criticism of a lot of criticisms of him related to age, the economy, his presidency as a whole. He has successfully navigated, I think, the democracy stuff very well, and for that reason, if we get to a point in September or October where we see that democracy as an issue is really gaining, that could be an early indicator that Joe Biden has some momentum. So those are my immediate, just right off the bat, observations about these dynamics among voters. I don't love all these. I think a lot of them are kind of random, but that's just what I noticed when I read through this poll initially. But let's talk about the crosstabs. So for starters, they have it sort of like this, which I don't like. I really wish that they didn't do it like this, but we're going to work with it. So when you look at age and race and gender, kind of just shows how, the sample, what the sample is comprised of. The first thing I want to go find is race here, if I can do that, because that's generally a good place to start. You can kind of compare that to the, here we go, to what it was in the last election. You have, 80% white, 12% Hispanic. This is out of 1,000, so you can do the math in your head. 80% white, 12% Hispanic, 4.5%, 12% black, 4.5% Hispanic, 1.5% Asian, and then you have 1.8% other. I really hope I didn't do that wrong. That would have been bad, but yeah, I think I'm right about that. And that's a pretty good sample. I think Pennsylvania is about 81% white, or at least their electorate was. I don't know the demographics of the state, but the electorate was 81% white in 2020, I think. It's probably similar in 2022, so that checks. I think the black percentage in Pennsylvania of the electorate in 2020 was 11%, up to 12%. So again, that checks too. And then Hispanic, I think, was about 5%, 4.5%. That as well checks. So this sample seems very accurate, just based on the racial composition of it. And again, a lot of it is geographical, right? Like if you ask a white person who lives half an hour outside of Philadelphia how they're going to vote, they're more likely to be a Democrat than a white person who lives an hour south of Pittsburgh, or an hour, I don't know, an hour west of Pittsburgh in Westmoreland County, which is like a 65% Republican county, very white, very, I believe, kind of working class, blue collar, and so that voter is going to be different from a white voter, who has a college degree, who works, who lives in Chester County, who commutes into the city of Philadelphia. So, you have to remember that. But racially, I think that this poll kind of checks out just with how you'd expect the electorate to look. And then, go to age range. I don't have these memorized for Pennsylvania as a whole, but I can tell you that this sample doesn't look bad. 13%, kind of the young demographic, as we say. Well, I didn't mean to do that. There we go. 13% young. You have 16% 30 to 39, 13% 40 to 49, 21% 50 to 59, 20% 60 to 69, and then 18% 70 or more. I think this number might be a little high. I don't think that a fifth of Pennsylvania voters are over the age of 70, or maybe, a little less, 18%, same thing. But this number might be a little low. I would traditionally expect this age range, the 60s, to be above 20%. So maybe you can just kind of switch these around, maybe take a percent or two from here, put it here. Either way, these voters are going to skew Republican. If you look at how they break on the party registration, let's see if I can highlight this and make it easier for myself. Yeah, you'll see that these 60 through 69 favor Republicans. Favor Republicans. Surprisingly, it's a little close with the 70 and above. But again, party registration isn't everything. Like this sample is only R+3 with the 70+ voters. But I would bet a lot of money that come November, people who are above 70 in the state of Pennsylvania are going to vote for Trump by a lot more than 3%. So that's something worth noting. But yeah, so overall, this is not a bad poll. Like this is a genuinely high quality poll. It's February, so there's only so much they can do. But I like good polls. I like reading through them. I think they're interesting. And so right now, Trump up by 2 in Pennsylvania. Yeah, that makes sense. I think if you held an election tomorrow, he'd probably win it. Maybe by a little less, but luckily for Joe Biden, luckily for Democrats, the election's not tomorrow. And I think that things can improve for them, especially if they really ramp up their campaign, really work on voter engagement, registration, turnout, all that stuff, which is obviously hard to predict before it happens. But when it starts happening, you can kind of see, especially based on the early vote data. So thank you all for watching. Let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you all in the next video.